The Supreme Court has just issued a historic ruling on Colorado's attempt to block Donald Trump from appearing on the presidential ballot. And this decision dropped literally one day before Super Tuesday, when voters in 15 states, including Colorado, head to the polls. So, the Supreme Court just released a ruling that everybody is talking about, and I mean everybody. But here's the part almost no one seems to grasp. Most people have the story completely wrong. They're celebrating, or they're panicking, depending on their political side, right? But very few are actually reading what the court wrote, the literal text of the ruling, and that's the real problem. Because what actually happened is way more complex than the headlines make it seem. The media is spinning it in one direction or the other, and regular people are just absorbing whatever narrative lines up with their worldview. That's not how we do things here. We're going to walk through exactly what the ruling says and what it truly means for the future of American politics. But before we dive deeper, let me be straight with you: mainstream media isn't exactly trustworthy anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics: real stories, real context, no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the noise, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Links in the description. And if you want to support what we're doing, join us and be part of a community that actually cares about the truth. Alright, back to the video. Terry, what have you seen so far? Well, David, this is one of those rare moments where the usually divided Supreme Court was completely unanimous. All 9 justices agreed that states can't remove candidates from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. That clause, passed right after the Civil War, said that anyone who took an oath to uphold the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection is barred from holding federal office. What the Supreme Court said today is that states cannot enforce that clause themselves. They said Congress has to pass a law outlining how it should be applied. In other words, enforcing that part of the Constitution is Congress's job, not the states. The court also raised concerns about chaos. Where some states might ban one candidate, others might ban a different one, and others keep everyone on the ballot. They said that kind of disruption can't happen. Let me put this into context because it matters. The Supreme Court, all 9 justices, came together and said states cannot remove Trump from the ballot. Unanimous decision, 9-0. Colorado tried it. Maine tried it. Illinois was heading in that direction. And the Supreme Court shut it all down. This ruling ended every single state-level attempt to remove Trump from presidential ballots nationwide. Now, if you support Trump, you're probably calling this a huge win. You're thinking the court finally did something right, stopped election interference, and defended democracy. And if you're on the other side, you're probably furious, convinced that the court handed Trump a free pass and tilted the system away from accountability. But here's the part almost no one is mentioning. And this is the part that matters most. The court did not say Trump is innocent. They did not say he didn't do anything wrong on January 6th. They didn't even address that question at all. They completely sidestepped the most important issue in this entire debate. What they said, and this is critical, is that states do not have the authority to make that judgment. Colorado, Maine, or any other state cannot decide whether a presidential candidate committed insurrection. That power lies somewhere else entirely. And the court left that question unresolved. So who does have that authority? Congress? Maybe the federal courts? Possibly. Maybe no one has clearly defined authority yet. The Supreme Court left that door wide open and offered no clear answers. And this is where things get really interesting, because we are now in uncharted constitutional territory. Everyone's been focused on the ballot issue, but the legal processes are still unfolding in the background. Investigations are still happening. cases are still moving forward. And the Supreme Court stayed completely away from all of that. They purposely refused to touch anything involving the ongoing criminal matters that could still have major consequences. Think about what that means. Trump stays on the ballot. He wins his second term. He is back in the White House, running the country. Okay, settled. But the legal consequences? Those are still very much alive. The court basically said, sure, you can be on the ballot and even win, but that doesn't protect you from anything else. Come on. That's wild when you slow down and really think about it. And here's what really fires me up. The constitutional fight isn't over, not even close. There's also an entire debate about whether Congress has the authority to step in during the certification of election results. So let me ask you something important. Did Trump actually win here? Like truly win, in the way his supporters are saying? On the surface, yes. He stays on the ballot and he's back in the White House. That's a win by any normal measurement. But underneath that, there's still a massive legal cloud hanging over everything he does. The DOJ investigations haven't stopped. The special counsel work hasn't disappeared. And the Supreme Court just made it clear that being president doesn't shield you from the law. And people who think this ruling ends the story aren't paying attention. This ruling is basically the start of a brand new chapter, one where the legal system and the political system collide in ways we've never seen before. Let's get into what actually happened, because the details matter more than people realize. Most folks read the headline and move on. They don't understand what the Supreme Court actually did or why they did it the way they did. Here's the background you need. After January 6, 2021, some people started asking a serious legal question: can Trump even run for office again? Is he even eligible under the Constitution? And they weren't being partisan, they were pointing to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This was written after the Civil War, when the country was figuring out how to deal with Confederate leaders. It basically says that if you engaged in insurrection against the United States, you can't hold federal office ever again. Pretty straightforward. If you try to overthrow the government, you don't get to run it afterward. Makes sense. Activists and lawyers in Colorado took this argument to court. They said Trump incited an insurrection on January 6, so under the Constitution he's disqualified from the ballot. And the Colorado Supreme Court agreed. They literally removed Trump from the ballot. A state Supreme Court said a major party nominee, a former president, could not be listed on their ballot. Maine's Secretary of State made a similar determination. Illinois was moving in that direction. It was spreading nationwide. Trump's legal team rushed to the U.S. Supreme Court because this was an existential threat to his political future. And that brings us to the ruling. The Supreme Court looked at all of this and said, nope. States can't do this on their own. You don't have the authority to disqualify a presidential candidate under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That's not your decision to make. Now, the complicated part, the reasoning behind the ruling. The court said that when it comes to federal elections, especially the presidency, states can't create their own standards for who is eligible. There must be federal enforcement of Section 3. Maybe Congress passes legislation. Maybe federal courts handle it after proper legal proceedings. But states cannot decide on their own that a presidential candidate is an insurrectionist. And honestly, when you think about it, that logic makes sense. If each state could decide eligibility on its own, we'd have total chaos. California could say one thing, Texas another, and every election would turn into a 50-state legal puzzle. So the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no. This has to be dealt with federally. Now here's the part everyone is missing. The court did not say Trump didn't commit insurrection. They didn't touch that issue. They didn't say January 6th wasn't an insurrection. They simply avoided that entirely. Not by accident. They did it intentionally. If they ruled directly on whether Trump committed insurrection, it would have massive consequences for all ongoing legal cases and set precedent for the future. They didn't want to go that far. So they sidestepped it. The underlying question, whether Trump actually engaged in insurrection, remains unresolved. And this is where legal experts are getting loud, because Trump's legal danger hasn't decreased at all. If anything, the ruling might make accountability easier by pushing everything to federal channels. The court essentially said, if you want to deal with insurrection issues, do it through Congress, federal courts, or criminal prosecution, not through state ballots. And guess what's still happening right now? Criminal prosecution. Federal investigations. DOJ work. Special counsel investigations. And now the Supreme Court has signaled that those are the proper venues for accountability. So while Trump celebrates staying on the ballot, the legal machinery is still grinding behind the scenes. And the court just gave everyone a clearer roadmap for how accountability might unfold. Now let's talk about Congress, because people are ignoring this part. There is a legitimate constitutional argument, supported by serious legal scholars, that Congress might ultimately decide whether someone is disqualified under the 14th Amendment. And that moment could come during the certification of electoral votes. Certification is the process where Congress officially counts the electoral votes after an election. That's what was happening on January 6th. And during certification, members of Congress can object to electors from any state. One possible basis for objection? That a candidate is constitutionally disqualified under the 14th Amendment. This idea hasn't been tested in modern times, but it exists. And with the Supreme Court pushing everything to the federal level, it matters more now than ever. The court left this door open. And that's why this story is just beginning, not ending. The ballot question is settled, but the bigger questions about accountability, presidential power, and constitutional authority are all still unresolved. We're heading into 2026 midterms and then 2028, and all these legal and constitutional issues will play out against that political backdrop. Every development will be political. Every ruling will have election consequences. The legal system and political system are now intertwined at a level we've never seen. And the Supreme Court made the situation more intense, not less. So yes, Trump won this round. He stays on the ballot and he's back in the White House. But the legal storm is still coming. Okay, let's break this down into the core points you need to understand. Point 1. The ruling was extremely narrow. The court said only one thing: states cannot disqualify presidential candidates under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment without federal legislation. That's it. They didn't rule on Trump's innocence. They didn't rule on January 6th. They avoided all the big questions intentionally. Point 2. All the legal investigations are still happening. None of the criminal cases against Trump were affected. The DOJ is still moving. The special counsel is still working. The court basically said federal prosecution or congressional action, not state ballots, is the path for accountability. And the DOJ has shown zero signs of slowing down. Point 3. The constitutional debate is far from over. The court didn't solve anything beyond the narrow question of state authority. Huge questions remain. Who enforces Section 3? What's Congress's role? What if Congress and the courts disagree? These unresolved tensions will show up again in future elections. Point 4. The political stakes are enormous. Every legal development will be interpreted through a political lens. Trump is both president and potentially a criminal defendant at the same time, an unprecedented combination that guarantees ongoing conflict. Point 5. This ruling sets a precedent that will affect U.S. politics for generations. States now know they cannot unilaterally disqualify presidential candidates. That's the law now, and future cases will start from this point. So what happens next? Honestly, nobody knows. The legal cases will continue. Charges could still come. Congress might act or not. But one thing is certain, this story is nowhere near over. This ruling isn't the end. It's barely the middle. The Supreme Court ruling is just one chapter in a long book, and the biggest constitutional battles may still be ahead. Alright, that's what I've got for you today. Next time we're breaking down exactly what Trump's legal team is preparing for their defense. Trust me, you're going to want to see that breakdown. Stay tuned.